There is no time that we are more vulnerable than when we are asleep. It's kind of crazy, isn't it? Every night, for multiple hours, we turn off our senses and hold almost completely still in bed. If you believe in an intelligent creator, you might even call this a design flaw. It's laughable how dangerous the concept of sleep is. Now, you might be hearing this line of logic and thinking, I have locks on my doors, cameras on my roof, and I live in a gated community. I'm not in any danger. And if that's actually what you believe, I admire your confidence. Those defensive measures don't make your home into a fortress. They make it into an obstacle course for the horrors that really want to get to you. But we're getting away from my point. Have you ever suddenly woken up, middle of the night, with the unshakable feeling that something has its eyes on you? In my quiet horror video, a video I can't help but reference all the time, I laid out a scene similar to this. What if you looked out the window, late at night, and saw a figure staring at you from the street? Some of the comments I received told me that I hit the horror nail on the head. They'd be freaked. The idea of being noticed by someone far away with dubious intentions is intimidating, especially under the light of the moon. But allow me to adjust the hypothetical for you. In this scenario, it's still night. Everyone's still asleep. It's still quiet. Except, instead of your anxiety being triggered by the look of a stranger outside, it's already running wild. For a reason you can't understand, your brain is suddenly hyperactive, measuring every wall of the room, fixating on the shapes poking out of the dark corners, making annoying assumptions and causing you to panic. Why do you feel like this? What does your brain know that you don't? You look around your room, in the closet, under the bed, hell, even out the window. Nothing. And yet, that feeling still remains. That feeling that someone or something is watching you. And you don't know why. You feel almost crazy because if you've checked everywhere and found nothing, shouldn't the feeling be gone? Shouldn't logic take over, the clouds of sleep in your mind drifting away by now? You know no one's looking. You are certain of it. But that's not actually true. Doubt remains heavy on your shoulders and gut. What's worse, knowing that you're being watched, or not knowing?
It's terrifying realizing you're being watched without your knowledge. Every so often you find yourself looking in the closet, under the bed, behind the curtains, but what if that's not where you were being watched from? What if the real threat wasn't in your house, but in your phone or your computer? In our current digital age, it's never been easier to be seen, with an endless supply of accounts, passwords, emails, and phone numbers for creeps to peek at while you're not aware. That sounds pretty frightening to me, and that's why this video is sponsored by Aura. Data brokers sell your information to scammers, spammers, and anyone else who may want to target you. Your full name, email, house address, even relative information, it's all out there. I looked at my phone number on one of the countless information selling sites that they have out there, and I realized that details about my life, including social media accounts, family information, and even stuff like my address, were all available for purchase at a very low price. We've all gotten used to the idea that privacy is hard to come by, but seeing it all laid out like this, it's pretty spooky, and that's why I've been using Aura, the sponsor of today's video. Aura shows me which data brokers are selling my information and automatically submits opt-out requests for me. Cleaning up my information not only helps reduce the amount of spam I get, but it protects me from hackers who could use the information to help them access my social media accounts, bank accounts, or other sensitive information. Pretty recently, AT&T revealed that over 73 million customer records for both existing and former customers were released on the dark web. They recommend that those affected use strong passwords, monitor account activity, and even consider credit freezes or fraud alerts from credit bureaus. Well, Aura does all of this for me, and the best part is I don't have to download a bunch of apps just because some company couldn't keep my data secure. If my info was compromised during the AT&T data breach, I wouldn't be worried because Aura is always on. always doing the hard work of keeping me safe. I value my privacy and I value yours. You can go to aura.com/ConnorMcGrath to start your 2-week free trial, which is also linked in the description below. For all you know, there's someone behind you right now, quietly observing you as you watch this video. I can't help you with that, but thanks to Aura, you don't have to worry about the same thing happening to you online. I was already a fan of Aura before they contacted me for this sponsorship, and I'm super excited to be working with them. Download Aura today using my link and protect your privacy. Thank you again, Aura, for sponsoring this video. Now, let's check behind the curtain one more time.
Let's return to that word you read at the beginning of the video. Scopaesthesia is another word for a phenomenon experts in the field like to call the psychic staring effect. A phenomenon which you might be able to parse based on just the name alone. Essentially, it refers to an alleged extrasensory phenomenon that tells someone when they're being watched, even if there's no way for them to have known that for sure. Extrasensory, as a term, is fun because it can mean a lot of things of varying drama depending on who is using it. In some cases, the word extrasensory refers to things like ESP, psychic abilities stemming from a sixth or extra, more metaphysical sense, a field of study that is still very much a point of contention among different experts. However, in other cases, it can be a more tame reference to something like noetic sciences. Noetic science, as I understand it, is a way of understanding the intersection between the subjective human experience of reality and the measurable, objective truths of physics. There are elements of the human experience which can be measured, like blood pressure and heart rate, and there are also elements that cannot, like intuition or love. Essentially, noetic sciences are trying to explain certain metaphysical ideas, like the inherent unmeasurable elements of the human experience, by using pre-established scientific principles as a foundation. It's a controversial thought process, and some argue that the idea is based on shaky science or outright fallacy, like Dr. Stephen Novella, a neurologist and noted co-founder of the New England Skeptical Society and the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, as well as a number of other respected institutions.
It is likely no coincidence that those who believe in very unlikely phenomena tend to rely upon very poor quality evidence. IONS makes this fallacy explicit, stating on their website, "Non-local consciousness effects have been objectively demonstrated by the IONS research team and by our many colleagues worldwide over the past 140 years, to a level of confidence such that further proof-oriented experiments are no longer necessary. The next research advancement, as reflected by most studies that are being conducted today, are process-oriented experiments, which are interested in what factors modulate these effects. And that is why they are doing pseudoscience. It's not because they are studying psi phenomena, it's because they falsely believe existing evidence proves it exists."
What this is illustrating is an example of one portion of the scientific field discrediting another because it's founded on ideas which cannot be easily defended or which have been misrepresented. This isn't a new argument in science. The best way I can think to explain it is by equating it to the culture surrounding cryptozoology. Cryptozoology is the study of cryptids, aka reported creatures who have not yet been documented fully over the course of history. In general, people, myself included, use cryptid as a simple term for any monster, animal, or urban legend that has not been officially recorded before. But in actuality, real cryptozoology is founded much more on science than myth. See, for a creature to be a cryptid, it doesn't need to be supernatural or intelligent, it just needs to be talked about and not recorded. The dodo bird and the giant squid were both creatures that were thought to be mythological until the remains of dodos were examined in the 19th century, and later, giant squids were recorded on video. Now, pretend that instead of the dodo bird, we were talking about something like being psychic. Now, the majority of the scientific field, much like in discussions about the dodo or the giant squid, might try to tell you that being psychic isn't real because there isn't enough evidence to support its existence across the board. Certain philosophies, however, make the claim that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Or more simply, just because you or I haven't seen something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. That quote has been attributed to Carl Sagan, by the way, a well-known critical thinker as it applies to the nature of reality. I'm telling you all of this because I want to talk more about the hypothetical I brought up in the introduction, this sudden waking up and feeling watched. If you aren't familiar with, or don't believe in scopaesthesia, you might be able to wave away that feeling of being watched as some kind of bleed-over effect from having recently left the REM sleep stage. There are a ton of ghost stories that start with someone waking up in the middle of the night, and it's understandable why stories like that are so easily dismissed. We're familiar with the idea of failing to recognize absolute reality directly after waking up, And a perfect example of this is sleep paralysis. If you've ever experienced sleep paralysis before, then you must know how disorienting it is. Panic sets in as you realize that your mind is awake, but that you cannot control your body, and it hardly stops there. A lot of people who experience frequent sleep paralysis report encounters with figures we've taken as a society to calling sleep demons, or sleep paralysis demons. Essentially, when you leave your dreaming state, to quote The Haunting of Hill House, the dreams can sometimes spill over, and you encounter things that aren't real in a place that is. It's a very disorienting and scary thing to deal with, especially the first time, because in this vulnerable state, about 75% of the time, definitively malevolent figures appear around you. Witches, demons, sometimes fairy tale creatures, they can take many forms, but regardless of that, they always feel evil, and they're always watching you. Now, taking this scientific explanation at face value is the most comfortable option. The figures might look scary, but you can understand that they're only in your head and that you're not actually in any real danger. However, if you're a more spiritual person, or simply believe that science hasn't gotten around to explaining everything about reality, then the fact that, according to thesleepfoundation.org, scientists do not know the exact cause of sleep paralysis demons might be a very concerning factor. Maybe it's not the fact that you're experiencing the feeling of being watched because you recently woke up. Maybe you're actually experiencing scopaesthesia, and there is something in your room. Maybe the demon is real. Now, I'm not a scientist, and I can already hear the frantic key tappings of more educated people telling me what I got wrong about this field of research. That's fine, I'm happy to hear it. What I am educated on, at least to a certain degree, though, is fear. Either way, whether or not the sensation is imagined or not, whether or not you're doing it to yourself, the feeling of being watched, especially in private or when we don't expect it, terrifies people. And when something terrifies us, we tell stories about it. The concept of this essay came from researching for a new creepypasta video, one which, at this point, definitely isn't going to get made, so that means I can talk about it here. That creepypasta is The Rake. The Rake was a story written by Brian Somerville in the summer of 2006. It's a super iconic creepypasta, right up there with Slenderman, Jeff the Killer, and Eyeless Jack. The Rake itself is a humanoid-ish entity that has apparently been around for hundreds of years. If you've been wandering the internet horror world for a while, you've almost certainly seen this specific image of the creature. All things considered, the Rake by itself isn't that scary. It's definitely dangerous, but as I've implied before, the threat of violence or danger isn't necessarily as evocative as other horror elements, like intention or circumstance. What is scary about the Rake is the way that most people describe encountering it. Depending on who you ask, the Rake infects its victims first by crawling into their dreams, then by regular killing them, I guess. The original story doesn't really do much to explain the motives of such a creature. However, either in their dreams or in reality, most people's first encounter with the Rake is seeing it crouched silently at the edge of their bed, staring them down, whispering something they cannot hear or comprehend. I may have mentioned it before, but subtlety and the room to use your imagination works wonders for horror fiction, and here's a good example of that, represented with a character who is already intimidating by themselves, in this case because they have an uncanny and predatory design, and then we're informed that this monster has been in the room longer than we were actively conscious for. This raises a lot of questions. When did it get here? And how? And why? What has it been doing while I slept? Has it been moving around, or has it been watching me the whole time? Why is it watching me and not attacking? And with those questions come a lot of hypothetical answers. Your brain taking the lack of information and deciding, okay, if I've got room to work, then I'm gonna get weird with it. And suddenly, no explanation is off limits, creating an infinite potential for further horror. The Rake is scary because it describes a circumstance where something indeed is watching, and that if and when we do notice it, it's technically already too late. It's in the house, on the bed, and still, it's exactly where it wants to be. The fear of being watched is really odd because there's almost a part of you that wants to be right, that wants to open the closet door and find a person hidden inside. It's a sanity thing, I think, because the feeling of dread and panic is so real, so obtrusive and hard to ignore, that it seems genuinely impossible that you could be wrong, that nothing actually is watching. But, as the Broadus family discovered in 2014, there comes no relief in being proven right. This is a true story. 657 Boulevard, Westfield, New Jersey. It's summer, and a family of 5, 2 parents and 3 kids, are in the process of moving into a century-old house. They're replacing the Woods family. They come in and out, moving their belongings and family into what was supposed to be a new dream home, but immediately come to realize a terrible truth: that within 2 days of the house being sold, despite no public listing being available, the family begins receiving letters from an unknown person calling themselves the Watcher. The Watcher knows very concerning things about the family, things they could not know unless they had been actively observing the family. An early letter received by the family thanks the parents for bringing the young blood, aka the children, to the home, with a further quote, "Once I know their names, I will call them and draw them to me." In his second letter, the Watcher used a phonetic spelling of the family's last name, implying horribly that not only was the Watcher becoming more familiar with the family, but that he was somehow close enough to hear their names. Obviously, I don't have to lay out for you why exactly receiving these letters would be so horrifying, but I will anyway. Beyond the actual physical sensation of being watched, the Watcher's presence in this family's life revealed several terrible truths all at once. The first, most obvious, was the threat to the family. The language used in the messages, in tandem with the anonymity of the sender, created an atmosphere of constant alertedness. The family never knew if they were being watched, or if they were in danger, or what that danger could even be. The fixation on the children is particularly concerning. Who in their right mind would be comfortable letting their child out of their sight when an unknown person had said verbatim that they intended to learn the children's names and call to them? This was too much to try and ignore. The second unfortunate thing that was revealed was the untrustworthiness of the authorities. In 2015, the mayor stated that the police investigation had been exhaustive and left no stone unturned, but apparently, as further examination has clarified, this is simply not the case. Apparently, the police phoned the whole thing in, even failing to talk to immediate neighbors in the area about the events. A family being menaced by an unknown individual just wanted some kind of resolution, but due to the failures of the local police, as well as the random retiring of the police chief during investigation, they never were able to feel safe, which results in our third unfortunate result. The Broaddus family spent a lot of money to buy the historic house, but were so uncomfortable and terrified of living there that 5 years after purchasing the house, but never officially moving in, they sold it for much less than they purchased it for, losing about $400,000. In an update with journalist Reeves Wiedemann, just after closing in March of 2019, Derek Broaddus confirmed via email the completion of his 60th mortgage payment on the house that he had never lived in. This family was absolutely wrecked by their experiences in that house. The true identity of the Watcher was never discovered. How scary is that? To know that you were right, that the eyes on your back were actually there, but never to know who they belonged to. Maybe someone out there has a picture of you, belongings of yours, even clothes or hair. There are a lot of creeps in this world who do a lot of creepy things without much logic or reason, and for someone as aggressive as the Watcher, I don't think I could ever stop thinking about it. But still, I could at least feel comfortable knowing it was another human. That moving away, despite the obstacles, still was a viable way of separating yourself from your terrible audience. I could make peace with it. Peace is not what I aim for in these essays, though, so now I want to talk about a different, more cosmic version of observation. It's not your fellow man anymore. It's something more than that. What if at all times, across the board, with no exception, you knew that you were being watched by a supernatural force 1,000,000,000,000 times more powerful than you? What if every action you took was taken with the understanding that an entity beyond your very comprehension was watching and judging you? Would you fear that entity, or would you worship it? Let's talk about God. Now, to be clear, I'm not disparaging the Christian faith. A lot of my family is Christian, and I grew up pretty exposed to it, so I understand how important it is to certain people, and the good that it can do under the right circumstances. The horror I'm about to describe is not from the direct action of the Lord, but rather the way he's talked about in certain groups. If you grew up with any Catholic influence, then you already know exactly what I'm talking about. There's this concept of a sort of state of mind that certain people can fall victim to called Catholic guilt. Essentially, a lot of people who grow up in Catholicism also grow up with a firm understanding that God can see and hear everything they do or think. Their pastor or their parents or peers or some combination of all three will hyperfixate on the alleged inherent evils of mankind and taking responsibility for every mistake you make, their words elevated by the threat of hell. The Catholic religion puts a lot of focus on purity and the avoidance and consequence of sin, a nebulous theological concept that refers to the moral transgressions humans will sometimes commit against the will of God. Sometimes, especially as it relates to sexuality and self-expression, certain Catholic individuals will develop a sort of complex, one that makes them very aware of every sin they commit, every misstep, even every impure thought, because they've been taught that they exist without privacy. God is always watching, and you don't want to make him angry. When you have a guilt complex, you go out of your way to become a people pleaser. When negative events occur, or someone feels bad, you kind of believe you were responsible for it, even if all evidence points to the contrary, and the next logical step for you is to do whatever you can to make the negative circumstance go away. A lot of people can develop these complexes with their parents or teachers or friends, the people who have the most power over them, who have the greatest ability to react to their actions in a meaningful way, and that by itself can cause a lot of problems, especially if this guilt is abused. But when the person you're trying to please is God, the stakes get way higher, despite the actual actions you can take staying the same. Sometimes, a guilt complex develops naturally, due to a weird combination of events and experiences, a freak reaction that sticks with you. However, in certain cases, like for instance within the institution of the church, guilt is weaponized. People are intimidated into thinking that not only is God watching, but that he's angry, and the only way to please him is to become more devoted to the church. Donating more, converting others, avoiding those who could be thought of as impure, you become a victim to the deity who is supposed to be your salvation, the warm embrace of your creator corrupted into something like the maw of a Venus flytrap. I can't tell you how to deal with Catholic guilt, because I struggle with a non-denominational guilt complex myself. My best recommendation is therapy, and my second recommendation is to take a deeper look at the text your religion is founded on. However, not all omniscient deities are created equal. I'm having trouble remembering, but I swear I listened to this podcast that was all about watching people and feeding off of their fear. You probably don't know about it since I talk about it pretty infrequently, but it's this little indie horror podcast called
The Magnus Archives!
I did it again, guys. I figured out how to work the Magnus Archives into yet another unrelated video. I don't know if it's more of a testament to that show's incredible writing or to my incredible ability to reach, but either way, bring out the balloons and streamers. There's gonna be spoilers again. Sorry. In my very first Magnus Archives video, when I talked about the eye, I specifically focused on the fact that we're consistently surrounded by cameras, with our phones and security systems and whatnot. There was an era of paranoia to the section, where I made it out like the whole world was actively out to watch your every move. That's scary enough by itself, sure, but it's also vaguely unfocused. We know the NSA listens to our calls, but that fact alone doesn't stop us from making them, even though maybe it should. And it's for the sole reason that the NSA doesn't have a face. It's a group of people, a government organization. When I imagine the NSA, I imagine something similar to a call center, and those don't freak me out. There's something so much scarier about being watched when it's personal, though. A one-on-one interaction. There's a distinct air of paranoia that permeates throughout the actual archives of the Magnus Institute, and it's heavy enough that it finds a way to leak out of your speakers and infect your personal space as well. It's there from the very beginning, but somewhere around Season 2, John gets very paranoid about the people he's working with. He's just endured a traumatic experience, and he's definitely exhausted and scared, but he can't shake the feeling that something is watching him, that someone on the team is lying to him, trying to manipulate him in some way. He's right. The most frustrating part is that despite every sense telling him something is wrong, he doesn't know what it is. The sensation is super frustrating, this constant dread and suspicion with no direction to send it in. It festers, making you bitter and sharp. The reality is, there are multiple lies being told around John by multiple people, or at least things hiding as people. And when he confronts one of them about it, they lie to his face. There are 3 entities, potentially more, watching John in this moment. His friend Sasha has been acting strangely, though he finds ways to discount it. He shouldn't. Sasha is dead, and the thing he talks to every day is a liar. His boss, Elias, pretends there's nothing going on, that John is experiencing a mental break. The truth is, every part of Elias is a lie, even his name. There is a grand conspiracy, and John will walk right into it. Of course, the final entity is the eye itself, which is latched onto John like a parasite without him even knowing it. Over the course of the show, the eye will mutate John into a figure he can't even recognize in pursuit of using him as a tool, making him an avatar of observation. Is it any wonder he was so desperate for each new story? To glimpse into the life of another, one terrifying experience at a time? It's not enough that his life has become defined by the ceaseless watcher. Even as this avatar, John is still observed without his knowledge. The tape recorders that always seem to be around whenever something happens aren't a coincidence. Another entity has been spying on him. He truly cannot escape, and it exhausts him. Imagine for a moment that there actually was something watching you at all times. Maybe it's God, maybe it's the eye, maybe it's something else altogether. In a world where this isn't a theory, isn't based on a system of belief, and is instead hard, irrefutable fact, this eternal witness, how long would you last? No intervention, no communication, just always looking at you. Could you keep your sanity? Can you spend the rest of your life normally under that scale of a microscope? It's hard to say. You kind of do already. I talked about the NSA and the general surveillance state that is most of the developed world, but we forget how sneaky they can be about it. Sure, we know it's happening, vaguely, but if we're not reminded, if no one ever plays the footage back for us, we can keep it in the back of our minds, let it gather dust in a way that it might as well have been forgotten. If there was a giant eye hovering above our heads every time we made a phone call, though, I think we'd be more upset about it. I sometimes wonder if the fear of being watched is more about actually being observed, or being observed without knowing, or against your will. It seems easy to say it's about the latter, that it's the violation of the observation which is so threatening, and that totally makes sense. Feeling comfortable in one's own skin has a lot to do with the level of control you have over your current situation, and if you feel you've lost that control, even in your most private of moments, that can be really destructive. However, I think there probably are some cases where it's just about being observed at all. Have you ever been really good at something, like darts or making baskets, and then suddenly gotten really bad as soon as people are around? You're getting bullseye after bullseye, nothing but net. Then your friend walks in and you totally whiff. That, my friend, is probably social anxiety. People experience it to a lot of different degrees, but I think everyone wrestles with it now and again. The only differing feature is how easily someone can shake off that sensation. Now, I'm a fairly socially anxious person, which I'm sure you guessed. Sometimes my version of shooting hoops is literally walking. Have you ever had to walk out of a movie theater for any reason? Nightmare scenario in my world. I block someone's view of the screen with my body for a couple seconds, and all of a sudden I'm expressly aware of every single factor of my movement and appearance, from the awkward way I have to squeeze past people to the volume of my own breathing. Don't even get me started on airplanes. It's not like I have anything to actually be ashamed of, but for some reason, even at the glance of a stranger, I can sometimes become overwhelmed by anxiety. I feel like I've done something wrong or missed something. I'm not sure where that feeling comes from, but I'm working on it. Like I said, therapy is good for this kind of stuff. Whatever the reason, we really don't like being watched, and maybe it stems from our ancestors, when we had to be very wary of predators on a more regular basis. I think that generally, when we want to observe or be observed by someone in our day-to-day lives, we announce it. When you post a selfie to Instagram, you're telling at least a select group of people that you want to be seen by them. When we go to a play, we know that the actors are entertainers whose lifestyle is based on being watched, and it doesn't feel voyeuristic. It feels more predatory to be watched in secret, like the watcher has malicious motives to conceal. Otherwise, like I said, they'd announce themselves. Do you ever feel like you're being watched? It all comes back to what you believe you're capable of noticing. Whether or not you're right or wrong, if you convince yourself you're being watched, then you're being watched. Maybe not by the person outside, maybe not by a stalker or a god or monster or anything like that. Maybe in these moments, we become so afraid, so unsure of ourselves, that we can't help but feel like we're not ourselves anymore, that somehow another version has stepped out from our mind and is taking it all in. Maybe we're watching ourselves, but we'll probably never know.